I never thought I'd say this, but my marriage was nothing like the fairy tale I once believed it to be. My name is David Carter, and for the past 8 years, I've been married to Sarah, the woman I thought was my soulmate. We shared a home, dreams, and even plans for a family. But as it turned out, Sarah had secrets that shattered the foundation of everything I believed in. It all started with small things. Late-night phone calls she'd dismiss as work emergencies, an uncharacteristic amount of cash withdrawals from our joint account, and excuses that didn't quite add up. My suspicions grew, but I brushed them aside, convincing myself I was imagining things. One evening, she came home dressed far too glamorously for someone who claimed she was just meeting an old college friend. Her perfume lingered in the air, a scent I couldn't place, and there was a spark in her eyes that didn't feel right. "Busy night?" I asked casually, trying not to sound accusing. "Just the usual," she said with a dismissive smile, disappearing into the bedroom before I could ask more. That was when I decided I needed to know the truth. Suspicion is a cruel companion. It eats at you, whispering doubts you can't silence. I decided to act before those whispers turned into screams. The next morning, I waited for Sarah to leave, her usual excuse about errands rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. As soon as she was gone, I began my search. Her phone was locked, of course, but I wasn't surprised. Sarah had always kept a password on her phone, citing privacy as the reason. Instead, I turned to the receipts she often left crumpled in her purse or car. I found a receipt for a luxury hotel downtown, a place far beyond anything we'd ever splurge on together. Curiosity turned to dread as I dug deeper. I noticed she had a second phone charger stashed away in the bedroom, though I'd never seen a second phone. And when I checked our bank statements, I found payments to strange services I couldn't trace, always just vague enough to fly under the radar. But the real revelation came when I overheard her on the phone one evening. She thought I was in the shower, but I stood quietly in the hallway, listening as she laughed and flirted with someone she called Mr. Black. "I'll be there at 9. Usual room?" she said, her tone light and playful. Something inside me snapped. I had all the proof I needed. Sarah wasn't just lying to me. She was meeting someone at that hotel. And from the way she spoke, this wasn't the first time. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a betrayal I couldn't ignore. Anger swirled inside me like a storm, but I knew I couldn't confront Sarah just yet. I needed to see it for myself, to confirm what I already dreaded to be true. The next evening, Sarah announced she was heading out for a meeting. Her tone was casual, but her movements were calculated. She didn't kiss me goodbye, and her heels clicked against the floor as she walked out the door, leaving the faint scent of perfume in her wake. I waited 5 minutes before grabbing my coat and following her. Her car was easy to spot, and I kept my distance as she drove into the city. My heart raced as we approached the downtown area, and sure enough, she pulled into the parking lot of the luxury hotel I'd found on that suspicious receipt. She stepped out of the car, her figure wrapped in a tight black dress that was far from her usual business casual. As she disappeared through the hotel's glass doors, I parked nearby and followed, careful to keep out of sight. The concierge barely glanced at her as she walked to the elevators. Clearly, this wasn't her first visit. I approached the desk, pretending to inquire about a reservation, but my focus was on the guest book. My eyes scanned the entries until I found it. Room 814, under the name Samantha G. I booked a room on the same floor and hurried upstairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I stepped out of the elevator, I spotted her down the hall, knocking on the door of room 814. A man opened it, and the sight of her smiling up at him sent a fresh wave of fury through me. But this wasn't the moment to confront her. Not yet. I had something else planned, something that would turn the tables entirely. I returned to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my phone. If Sarah wanted to play games, then I'd make sure she understood exactly who she was dealing with. I didn't sleep that night. The image of Sarah smiling at that man burned into my mind, fueling my determination. It wasn't enough to catch her in the act. I needed to make her face the full weight of her betrayal. The next day, I began setting my plan in motion. I purchased a prepaid phone and used it to send Sarah a message, posing as an anonymous client interested in her services. I kept the tone professional, but just suggestive enough to catch her attention. She responded faster than I expected. "Who is this?" "Someone who's heard great things about you," I replied. "I'm willing to pay generously for a private meeting. Are you available this weekend?" There was a pause before her response came through. "Depends on the time and location. What do you have in mind?" I smiled grimly, my hands shaking as I typed out the details. "The downtown Hilton Saturday night. I'll text you the room number once I've checked in." Her reply was short but damning. "I'll be there. Half payment up front. Rest after." I stared at the screen, a mix of rage and satisfaction bubbling inside me. She didn't even hesitate. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated business arrangement. On Saturday, I arrived at the Hilton hours before our supposed meeting. I checked into the room I'd reserved and made sure everything was perfect. The dim lighting, the untouched bed, the small envelope of cash left conspicuously on the nightstand. And then I waited. The clock ticked slowly, each passing minute tightening the knot in my chest. Finally, at 8:55, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," I called, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. The door opened, and there she was, Sarah, dressed to kill. Her face painted with a coy smile that faded the moment she saw me sitting in the chair by the window. "David?" she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. Surprised. Sarah froze in the doorway, her face a mask of shock and guilt. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. I took a long, deliberate breath and gestured to the chair across from me. "Why don't you close the door and sit down, Sarah?" I said evenly. For a moment, she didn't move, like a deer caught in headlights. But then she stepped inside, closing the door with a soft click. She perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. What are you doing here?" she stammered. I leaned back, keeping my expression calm. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing." Her eyes darted to the envelope of cash on the nightstand, then back to me. "This isn't what it looks like," she said quickly, her voice trembling. I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because it looks exactly like what I think it is. You're here to meet a client. Or at least that's what you thought when you agreed to come." Her cheeks flushed crimson, and she opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "Don't bother denying it, Sarah. I know about the hotel visits, the second phone, the cash withdrawals. I even know about Mr. Black." Her body went rigid, and I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. "You've been spying on me?" she shot back, her voice rising defensively. "Spying?" I repeated with a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call it?" "I call it finding out the truth about the person who's been lying to my face for months." Her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms. "You don't understand, David. I had my reasons." "Save it," I snapped, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I don't want your excuses, Sarah. What I want is the truth." Why would you do this?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her composure cracking. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt trapped. Our life, it became so mundane, so predictable, and I wanted to feel alive again. "Alive?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You wanted to feel alive, so you destroyed everything we built? Is that it?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she murmured. "It started as just a way to make extra money. But then it became something else." "Something else?" I asked coldly. "Like betraying your husband? Selling yourself to strangers? Do you even realize how pathetic that sounds?" She flinched, her tears spilling over. "I didn't want to hurt you," she choked out. "But you did," I said sharply. "And now you're going to face the consequences." Sarah sat silently, her tears streaking her perfectly made-up face. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt pity for her, almost but the memory of her betrayal hardened me again. She finally found her voice, trembling but defiant. You're not innocent in this either, David. Don't act like you haven't played a part in what's happened. I raised an eyebrow, folding my arms. Oh, really? Enlighten me, Sarah. What part did I play in you sneaking off to hotels and selling yourself? Her gaze flickered with something new, desperation mixed with a hint of manipulation. You neglected me. You stopped paying attention, stopped making me feel special. You buried yourself in work, in routines, and I was left feeling invisible. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. So, it's my fault? That's what you're saying? Because I worked to provide for us? Because I trusted you enough to believe you wouldn't destroy our marriage? She faltered, her confidence cracking, but she pressed on. I'm not saying it's all your fault, but it wasn't like I woke up one day and decided to do this. I was pushed. Pushed, I repeated, my voice rising. Let me get this straight. You were pushed to betray me, to lie to me, and to cheapen everything we built together. And somehow, that's on me. She didn't answer, her shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. I leaned forward, my tone cold and deliberate. Sarah, let me tell you something. You've been trying to manipulate this situation from the moment I walked in here. You thought you'd come up with some clever excuse, some sob story to make me the bad guy. But here's the truth. I'm the one who called you here tonight. I set this trap because I knew you'd fall into it. And you did, without hesitation. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. You planned this? That's right, I said, standing and towering over her. Because I needed you to see what you've become. I needed you to face the ugliness of what you've done. And I needed to show you that I'm not as blind or stupid as you thought. She sat frozen, her defiance evaporating as my words sank in. You think you can twist this? Make me feel guilty? It won't work. You're the one who destroyed this marriage, Sarah. And now you're going to deal with the fallout. Her tears returned, streaming down her face, but I didn't waver. I'd spent too long letting her lies chip away at me. Now it was time for her to face the truth, and for me to take control of my life again. Sarah sat frozen, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief. The silence between us grew heavier, the weight of my revelation pressing down on her. Finally, she broke, her voice trembling as she tried to regain control of the conversation. David, she started, her tone pleading. You don't understand. I don't. I interrupted sharply, my voice like a whip. Don't you dare try to spin this. You've been lying to me for months, possibly longer. You've betrayed me in ways I didn't think were possible. So spare me whatever excuses you're about to come up with. Her lip quivered, but then something shifted. The tears stopped, replaced by a flash of defiance. You think you're so perfect, she said, her tone hardening. You think this is all my fault, but you haven't exactly been present, David. You've ignored me, taken me for granted. And now you want to play the victim. I scoffed, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. Even now, you can't take responsibility for what you've done. I made mistakes, she admitted, standing up now, her hands clenched into fists. But we both did. And if you think you're so blameless, maybe I should start asking you where you've been, what you've been doing while I've been. Stop right there, I snapped, stepping closer. You don't get to turn this around on me. I've been working, providing for us, trying to build a life while you've been sneaking around behind my back. Don't you dare try to paint me as the villain here. She faltered, her bravado cracking under the force of my words. I wasn't. I didn't mean. You didn't mean what? I demanded. To get caught? To hurt me? To throw away everything we had for what, money? A thrill? What was it, Sarah? What was worth destroying our marriage? Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. For the first time, she seemed to truly grasp the gravity of her actions, the finality of what she'd done. David, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, but I still love you. We can fix this. Please, let me make it right. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the quiet room. Love? Don't insult me, Sarah. You don't betray the person you love. And as for fixing this, I'm not sure there's anything left to fix. She reached for me, but I stepped back, her touch as unwelcome as her words. We're done here, I said coldly. Go home. Think about what you've done. And don't think for a second that I'll just sweep this under the rug. Her shoulders sagged as she realized she'd lost the upper hand. Without another word, she turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind her. I stood there for a long moment, the silence almost deafening. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, I'd said everything I needed to say. The room felt impossibly still after Sarah left, as though her presence had been a storm that finally passed. But the chaos inside me hadn't subsided. Her desperate attempts to shift the blame, to manipulate me, only solidified what I already knew. I couldn't trust her anymore. I sat down in the chair she had just vacated, staring at the untouched envelope of cash on the nightstand. It felt like a cruel symbol of everything our marriage had become: cheap, transactional, and devoid of the love it once held. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me back to reality. I pulled it out and saw a message from Sarah. Please come home. We need to talk more. I'll do anything to make this right. Anything. It was a word that now felt meaningless coming from her. She'd already done the unthinkable, and her promises felt as empty as her excuses. I didn't reply. Instead, I started reflecting on how long this had really been going on. Her late-night work calls, the sudden influx of expensive dresses and makeup, the nights she'd come home too tired to talk, or worse, eager to pick a fight over nothing. I'd seen the signs, but I'd ignored them, choosing to believe the lies because it was easier than facing the truth. But now there was no more room for doubt. As I sat there, my mind racing, another thought crept in. What about the money? I hadn't fully understood why she needed extra cash. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. So where was it going? Was there another layer to her betrayal I hadn't uncovered yet? I pulled up our bank statements on my phone and started combing through them. The payments she'd made to vague service accounts were one thing, but now I noticed something else: withdrawals. Hundreds of dollars at a time, almost weekly, in cash. What had she done with all that money? And who else was involved? The questions mounted, and so did my anger. She hadn't just cheated on me physically. She'd betrayed me emotionally, financially, and in every other way that mattered. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to decide my next move. Sarah's betrayal had set off a domino effect, and now I wasn't just questioning her. I was questioning everything about our life together. The envelope of cash caught my eye again. I grabbed it, shoving it into my pocket as I headed for the door. I wasn't sure what I'd do next, but one thing was clear. Sarah wasn't going to manipulate her way out of this. Not this time. The drive home felt surreal, like I was leaving one life behind and stepping into another. The betrayal, the lies, the confrontation. It was all raw and fresh, but I had no intention of spiraling into impulsive decisions. If Sarah thought she could manipulate her way out of this, she was mistaken. When I arrived, the house was dark except for a single light in the living room. I stepped inside to find Sarah sitting on the couch, her face pale and her eyes rimmed with red. She'd clearly been crying, but I didn't let that sway me. "You're back," she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond, setting my keys on the counter and leaning against the wall. The silence between us was deafening, each second stretching longer than the last. "I've been thinking," she began cautiously, "about everything, about what I've done." I crossed my arms, my expression unreadable. "And," she hesitated, wringing her hands in her lap. "I want to fix this, David. I'll quit everything. I'll get a real job, go to therapy, whatever it takes. Just tell me what I need to do." Her voice cracked, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the woman I once fell in love with. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with. But that woman was buried under layers of deceit and selfishness, and I wasn't sure if she'd ever resurface. "You think it's that simple?" I asked, my tone cold. "You think quitting and apologizing erases everything? That it undoes the damage you've caused?" "I know it won't be easy," she said quickly, "but I'm willing to put in the work. Please, David, don't throw this away. Don't throw us away. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. You think I'm the one throwing us away? Sarah, you destroyed this marriage the moment you started sneaking around, lying, selling yourself. That was you, not me. She flinched, her tears starting again. I know, she whispered. I know I hurt you, but we've been together for so long. Doesn't that count for something? Can't we fight for what we had? What we had? I repeated, the words cutting through me. Do you even remember what we had, Sarah? Because I don't. All I see now is what we've lost, what you've taken away. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back, keeping the distance between us. I need time, I said firmly. Time to think, to figure out what's next. And you need to figure out what kind of person you want to be, because right now I don't know who you are anymore. Her sobs grew louder, but I turned and walked upstairs, closing the door behind me. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized how heavy the weight of her betrayal truly was. Trust wasn't something you could rebuild overnight, and love wasn't enough to fix what she'd broken. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let her dictate how this story ended. The following morning, I woke to the sound of Sarah moving around downstairs. For a moment, I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the previous night still pressing heavily on my chest. But avoiding her wouldn't solve anything. When I came down, she was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee. She looked up when I entered, her face a mixture of hope and fear. David, she began, setting the mug down. Can we talk? I leaned against the counter, keeping my distance. Talk, I said curtly. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. I meant what I said last night. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I know I've hurt you, but I'm not ready to give up on us. I love you. Love, I repeated, my tone sharp. You've got a funny way of showing it, Sarah. Do you even understand the depth of what you've done? Her eyes filled with tears, but I pressed on. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our marriage, our trust, everything we built together. And for what? For thrills? For money? For attention? She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I was thinking. I felt lost and I made terrible choices. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. I exhaled deeply, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. Here's the thing, Sarah. Love isn't enough. Not anymore. You've broken something that might never be fixed, and you need to understand that. She looked up, panic flashing in her eyes. But we can fix it. We can go to therapy, work through this. No, I interrupted, my voice firm. You don't get to dictate how this goes. I'm done playing the fool in your game, Sarah. If you want any chance of salvaging this, you're going to do it on my terms. Her face paled, but she nodded. Anything, she said quietly. I'll do anything. I stepped closer, crossing my arms. First, you're going to cut ties with everyone involved in this mess. Every client, every contact, gone. Second, we're going to split our finances. I'm not letting you touch another cent of my money until I can trust you again. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. Third, you're going to be honest with me. About everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. If I catch you hiding anything, it's over. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. I'll do it, she whispered. Whatever it takes. I studied her for a long moment, searching for any sign of manipulation or deceit. She looked broken, but I wasn't ready to believe her yet. This is your one chance, Sarah, I said coldly. If you want to prove you're serious, you'll do what I've asked. But don't think for a second that I've forgiven you. That's going to take a hell of a lot more than words. She didn't respond, just nodded silently as her tears continued to fall. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a sliver of control return to my life. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The days that followed were tense, like walking through a minefield where every step felt uncertain. Sarah kept her promise, or so it seemed. She deleted the second phone, handed over access to all her accounts, and even started looking for a regular job. But none of it felt real to me yet. Trust isn't rebuilt with gestures. It's earned with time. And time was something I wasn't sure I wanted to give her. One evening, we sat across from each other at the dinner table. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of forks scraping plates. Sarah's once vibrant chatter had been replaced by hesitant glances and soft apologies. Finally, she spoke. "David, I've been looking at therapists. I found one who specializes in marriage counseling. Maybe we could, go together?" I set my fork down and stared at her, my expression unreadable. "You think sitting in a room with a stranger is going to fix this?" She flinched at my tone but held her ground. "I think it's a start," she said quietly. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try, to prove to you that I'm committed to fixing this." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Therapy won't erase what you did, Sarah. It won't make me forget the lies, the betrayal, and it sure as hell won't bring back the trust you destroyed." "I know," she said, her voice trembling, "but it's all I can offer right now. A chance to rebuild one step at a time." I studied her for a long moment, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to reject her outright, to shut down every attempt she made to salvage our marriage. But another part, the part that still remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with, wanted to see if she was truly capable of change. "Fine," I said finally. "Set it up. But don't think for a second that this means I'm forgiving you. This is for me as much as it's for you." Her eyes lit up with a flicker of hope, but I wasn't ready to meet her halfway. Not yet. The next week, we attended our first counseling session. The therapist, a calm and soft-spoken woman named Dr. Lang, asked us to lay everything out on the table. I let Sarah speak first, her voice wavering as she described her feelings of dissatisfaction, her poor choices, and her regret. When it was my turn, I didn't hold back. I told Dr. Lang exactly how Sarah's betrayal had made me feel. Angry, humiliated, and deeply wounded. I didn't sugarcoat my words, and I didn't try to hide my contempt. "She broke my trust," I said bluntly, "and I don't know if that's something I can ever get back." Dr. Lang nodded thoughtfully, her pen moving across her notepad. "Rebuilding trust is one of the hardest things a relationship can endure," she said. "It's not just about words or actions. It's about consistency, accountability, and time. Are you both willing to put in the work?" I didn't answer right away. Was I willing? Or was I simply going through the motions, waiting for Sarah to slip up again, so I'd have an excuse to walk away? "I guess we'll find out," I said finally. Sarah reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. This wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. The counseling sessions became a routine, but the process was anything but smooth. Each session felt like peeling back a new layer of pain, forcing us to confront truths that neither of us wanted to face. Sarah tried hard to demonstrate her commitment. She opened up about her insecurities, her feelings of being overlooked, and the misguided choices she'd made to fill a void she couldn't explain. She cried a lot during those sessions, but her tears didn't move me the way they once might have. Dr. Lang pushed us to communicate openly, even when it hurt. "David, it's important to articulate what you need from Sarah to move forward," she said during one session. "I need her to be honest," I said bluntly. "Completely, brutally honest. No more lies, no more omissions. If she can't give me that, there's no point in continuing this." Sarah nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I will. I promise." But even as the weeks went by, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more she wasn't telling me. Her demeanor was different, guarded, almost rehearsed, like she was walking on eggshells around me. It was as if she was afraid that one wrong word might shatter whatever fragile peace we'd managed to build. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I caught her standing in the kitchen, staring at her phone with an expression that immediately set me on edge. She noticed me watching and quickly set the phone down, forcing a smile. "What's that about?" I asked, nodding toward the phone. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just a message from a coworker." The lie was so blatant, it nearly made me laugh. "You're doing it again," I said, my voice cold. Her face fell. Doing what? Lying to me? I said, stepping closer. Don't you get it, Sarah? This is exactly why I can't trust you. Even now, after everything, you're still hiding things from me. I'm not, she started, but I cut her off. Don't, I said sharply. Don't insult me by pretending. If you want any hope of saving this marriage, you'd better start telling me the truth. All of it. She looked down, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter. It was a client, she admitted quietly. My chest tightened, anger surging through me. You're still talking to them? After everything we agreed on? After everything you promised? It wasn't like that, she said quickly, her voice desperate. He reached out to me, not the other way around. I didn't respond. I swear. Her explanation did little to calm the storm inside me. The fact that she hadn't immediately told me about the message felt like another betrayal. Another crack in the fragile foundation we were trying to rebuild. This isn't going to work if you keep lying to me, I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. You say you want to fix this, but your actions keep proving otherwise. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to upset you. I thought I could handle it on my own. Well, you thought wrong, I snapped, turning away. I'm done with the excuses, Sarah. If you can't be honest with me, we're done. For good this time. She didn't respond, and the silence that followed was deafening. I left the kitchen, heading upstairs without another word. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. No matter how much Sarah promised to change, the cracks in our relationship felt deeper than ever, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength or the will to keep trying to hold it together. The following day, Sarah avoided me completely. She stayed in the guest room, emerging only to tend to the kids and retreating as soon as her duties were done. Part of me was relieved. I didn't have the energy for another confrontation, but her silence felt like yet another wedge driving us further apart. By the evening, I decided I'd had enough. I knocked on the door of the guest room, and when she didn't respond, I pushed it open to find her sitting on the bed, staring blankly at her hands. Sarah, I said, my voice firm. We need to talk. She looked up, her eyes hollow and rimmed with exhaustion. What's left to say, David? I already know what you're going to tell me. I failed you. Again. Her defeated tone caught me off guard, but I refused to let it sway me. You didn't just fail me, Sarah. You failed us. You failed this marriage. And honestly, I don't know how much more I can take. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't speak, letting me continue. This isn't just about the lying or the messages or even what you've done, I said, pacing the room. It's about the fact that you keep making decisions without thinking about the consequences. You keep prioritizing your needs, your feelings over everything else. Over me, over the kids. How do you expect me to trust you when you can't even be honest about a text message? Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. I don't know, David. I don't know how to fix this. I've tried, I really have. But no matter what I do, it's never enough. That's because you're not doing the one thing that matters, I said sharply. You're not being honest. You're not giving me a reason to believe that you've actually changed. She buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled as she spoke. I don't know how to be that person anymore. I've messed up so badly, and now I don't even recognize myself. I don't know who I am without this mess I've created. Her words stung, not because they absolved her, but because they revealed the depth of her brokenness. For the first time, I wondered if Sarah's betrayal wasn't just a symptom of her selfishness but also of something deeper, a void she didn't know how to fill. Then figure it out, I said, my tone softer but still resolute, because I can't keep holding this together on my own. If you want any chance of saving this marriage, you need to fix yourself first. And until you do, I don't know if there's a place for you in my life. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't comfort her. Couldn't. This wasn't something I could fix for her, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. I'm staying at the hotel again, I said after a long pause. Take some time to think about what you really want, Sarah. And if you can't find an answer, Then maybe it's time we admit this isn't working. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. David, please, don't go. But I didn't respond. I turned and walked out, the sound of her sobs echoing down the hallway. As I drove to the hotel, a sense of finality settled over me. I'd given Sarah every chance to prove she could change, and each time, she'd fallen short. Maybe it was time to accept that some things weren't meant to be saved. The hotel room felt cold and impersonal, a stark contrast to the life I once shared with Sarah. I sat by the window, staring out at the city lights, each flickering bulb a reminder of how far I'd drifted from the life I thought I'd built. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to think about what moving on might look like. What would it mean to live without Sarah? To split our lives apart, to tell the kids, to start over completely? The thought was as terrifying as it was liberating. Sarah texted me several times that night, her messages ranging from desperate apologies to promises that she'd change. I read them, but I didn't respond. Couldn't. I called my brother, Luke, the one person who'd always been my anchor in moments like this. He answered on the second ring. David, he said, his voice steady. What's going on? I hesitated, then let it all spill out. The lies, the betrayal, the counseling that seemed to go nowhere. By the time I finished, my throat was tight, and I could feel the sting of unshed tears. So, what are you going to do? Luke asked after a long pause. That's the thing, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I don't know if I can forgive her. And even if I could, I don't know if I want to anymore. You've been through hell, man, Luke said. Nobody would blame you if you walked away. But this isn't just about you and Sarah. It's about the kids, too. You need to think about what kind of environment you want them to grow up in. Is it better to stay and fight for a broken marriage, or to leave and give them peace? His words hit me hard. I thought about Lily and Max, their innocent faces, their laughter. They didn't know the details of what was happening between Sarah and me, but they could feel the tension. Staying in a toxic relationship for their sake wasn't the solution, but neither was ripping their world apart without a plan. I just don't want to make the wrong choice, I admitted. There is no perfect choice, Luke said gently. There's only the one you can live with. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of the room, turning his words over in my mind. For the first time, I felt a flicker of clarity. I wasn't ready to give Sarah an answer yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever decision I made, it had to be for me, not her. The next morning, I returned home. The weight of my decision felt heavy, but for the first time in weeks, I felt certain about what I needed to do. When I walked through the door, Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, her eyes red and swollen. She'd been crying again, and the sight of her so broken might have moved me once. Now it just made me feel tired. David, she said, her voice trembling, I didn't think you'd come back. I set my bag down, meeting her gaze with a steady expression. We need to talk. She nodded, motioning for me to sit at the table. I stayed standing. I've spent the last few weeks trying to figure out if I can forgive you. I began, my tone measured, trying to see if there's a way to move forward, to rebuild the life we had. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, stopping her. Let me finish. She closed her mouth, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. The truth is, I don't know if I can, I continued. You didn't just betray me, Sarah. You betrayed our trust, our marriage, everything we built together. And every time I've tried to give you a chance, you've shown me that I can't trust you not to hurt me again. Tears filled her eyes, but I pressed on. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me and for the kids. They deserve stability, peace, and parents who can show them what love and respect really mean. Right now, I don't think we can do that together. Her sobs broke through then, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. David, please, she choked out. I'll do anything. Just tell me what I need to do. I shook my head, the heaviness of the moment pressing down on me. You've had every chance to fix this, Sarah. And every time you've shown me that you're not ready to change. I can't keep waiting for you to become someone you're not. She looked up at me, her eyes desperate. Are you saying it's over? I'm saying I need space, I said firmly. We'll co-parent the kids, but I can't stay in this marriage. Not like this. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't let myself waver. I'd made my decision, and I wasn't going to let her tears pull me back into the cycle of betrayal and regret. I'll start looking for another place, I said after a long pause. We'll figure out the logistics, but for now, I think it's best if we focus on the kids and how to make this transition as smooth as possible for them. Sarah didn't respond, her tears falling silently as she nodded. As I walked out of the kitchen, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Ending a marriage isn't easy, but neither is staying in one that's already broken beyond repair. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for, but it was the one I needed. If you like our content, leave a like and subscribe for more videos.